Allow me to reintroduce myself. I'm focused, man.
He said, if you want to do anything worthwhile in life, you've got to be hungry.
Welcome to One Unsilenced Voice podcast,
What I'm trying to tell you, son, is be yourself.
where we amplify stories that deserve to be heard. You are now watching One Unsilenced Voice podcast.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, good morning, whenever you're listening. Welcome back to One Unsilenced Voice. It has been quite some time. I went on a little bit of a sabbatical, I feel like, with some personal things that I was dealing with, as well as, some things that I was kind of focused on for a little while. And I've been kind of praying about when I want to kick off season 3 and what I wanted to do. And I have a awesome special guest on here today. She goes by Coach Shawn. I'll let her introduce herself here in just a minute, but I'm excited for this. I think this is going to be an awesome podcast for some insight on dealing with trauma, dealing with alienation, things that sometimes go, unknown, or even kind of the silent warriors that are out there when people don't really realize that these things actually happen. So I'm eager. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to this conversation. So, Coach Shawn, you want to introduce yourself real quick? Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you, Ryan. I'm really glad to be here. I am Coach Shawn, and I really specialize in trauma recovery, specifically in regards to high conflict divorce, narcissistic marriages, and parental alienation.
Before we kind of get into this here, I'm going to read a quick opening monologue because it's been a little while since I've been on here. So there could be some first time listeners, specifically, your followers, Coach Shawn, that maybe haven't heard this podcast before, but maybe you need to understand a little bit more about it. And then I'm going to give a quick intro about you. And then we're going to dive right into some questions. Does that sound okay to you?
That sounds great. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, this podcast exists for people who have been through something they've never asked for. People who've had their character questioned, their story twisted, or their lives disrupted by systems that were supposed to protect them. It's for those who've had to rebuild quietly, often misunderstood, often alone, and still choose not to become bitter. If you listened before, you know this show was born out of my own personal journey. Growing up, personally for me, without my father, spending nearly 17 years without contact, and later finding myself navigating divorce, the family court system, while fighting simply to remain present in my own children's lives. Living inside that reality showed me how trauma, false narratives, and power dynamics can change a person, and how important it is to talk about healing the right way. So today's conversation is especially meaningful because my guest understands this terrain deeply. As I mentioned earlier, she goes by Coach Shawn, but Shawn Howerton, known to many as Coach Shawn, is a coach, speaker, and digital creator whose work centers on recovery, narcissistic abuse, high conflict divorce, parental alienation, and the long tail of reputational warfare that so many people quietly endure. But what drew me to her work wasn't just the clarity she brings to trauma, it's the way she centers responsibility, emotional maturity, boundaries, and faith without minimizing pain or feeding victimhood. Shawn just doesn't talk about surviving, she talks about becoming unshakable. So in today's episode, we're going to explore what healing really means when the damage wasn't just emotional, but relational, reputational, and systematic. We'll talk about trauma, the nervous system, family court realities, faith, and what it looks like to tell the truth without fear, even when it costs you. So if you're in the middle of a hard season, if you're trying to rebuild after loss, or you're learning how to stand firm without becoming reactive, hopefully this conversation is for you. Shawn, I'm grateful you're here. So everyone, welcome to One Unsilenced Voice. So with that said, for the people that are hearing your name for the first time, who are you today and what season of life are you standing in right now, Coach Shawn?
Well, first of all, thank you for that wonderful introduction. That was really amazing. My season of life that I'm in right now, well, I'm still in a building season. You don't come out of something like this unscathed. You're always building, you're always analyzing, you're always trying to put the pieces together and move on. Anybody that says, divorce is easy. It's certainly not easy, and certainly not if you were married to somebody that was a high conflict person, especially if you had children in the marriage. Um, right now, I'm in a place, a pretty good place. I'm in a place of really renewing my faith. It's always been strong, but I went through a period where I was pretty angry at God. Um, that almost chokes me up to say, because he brought me out of a lot. Um, I'm in a I'm in a place where I've forgiven, um, a lot of forgiveness, and people say, well, you do it for them, or you do it for you, not for them. And I always thought, well, what kind of what is that? What exactly does that mean? And I was carrying around all this anger. And then I realized when I let it go, I was reading the Bible recently, and Jesus had said, if you want your sins forgiven, then you need to forgive. And I knew how angry I was at him. And I knew I had said and done things that I wasn't proud of. And they all stemmed from anger. So I said, okay, God, we're going to do it your way. I was still pretty mad at this point. I said, okay, I'll forgive. So I did. I forgave my ex-husband for everything. I forgive him. I forgave my children, for hurting me,
Mm-hmm.
because I want them to forgive me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I felt this unbelievable release, um, this peace. I can't explain it. Um, it really is true. You don't forgive for them, you forgive for you. And it's so that you don't carry that. And that really means because it spills over into every relationship that you have,
Mm-hmm.
especially with those that you're angry at, but even with those that you're not angry at. And you can't move forward as long as you're angry. So I'm at a place right now that it feels pretty good, but it's not where I want to be, and I don't know that we ever get to where we want to be if we're always striving to do better. We probably don't.
Right.
But that's where I'm at today.
How did you how did you recognize and get to that point where you felt like you needed to forgive? And I mean, what brought you to that moment? And then, obviously, I know you said God spoke to you, but like, how do you get to that point for forgiveness? Because I think so many people can just hold on to that anger and that emotion for so long.
Honestly, I was I was sitting one night on my couch, and I was going through voicemails that I had left my children, specifically my older daughter. And this was after my mother died. No excuses, but I want to explain where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
And some things had transpired, and I was angry. I'd forgotten about this voicemail because when you go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, that's often why you only remember certain things. You say, "I remember this, but this is kind of hazy, and I remember that, but because your animal instinct takes over and your brain's not firing on all cylinders. It's just saying, I want to protect you."
Mm-hmm.
And so going through the voicemails, I came across one that I had sent her. And honestly, I was quite mortified at myself and ashamed. I was.
Mm-hmm.
I had said things that I wish I could take back.
Mm-hmm.
And while I recognize why I said it, and it was such a fight, and you could hear me, and then there would be pauses where I thought I had stopped talking, and then I would come back in, and I know exactly what that was. That's old trauma, complex PTSD. I know what it
Mm-hmm.
is. I recognize it. But I thought, I don't want to be that person anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And how do I stop letting the anger affect my life? Because I knew that it was always going to be there if I didn't do something with it to control it.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want it to spill over into my coaching. I didn't want it to spill over if I should ever meet someone.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make sure that I had that under control. And then shortly after that, I was reading the Bible, and God just said, look, if you want to get rid of that anger, you have to forgive.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, then you're going to carry it with you.
Mm-hmm.
And now I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt that I absolutely stop and think before I react. But I also know that you have to put distance between yourself and people who cause you to react,
Right.
and don't put yourself in situations that you know are going to be triggering to you. And I that was a hard lesson for me to learn.
What do you think that there are things that you've picked up? Um, is there anything that you can kind of reference back to, or that a best strategy to kind of help you that it r- to help you either self-reflect, or like you mentioned that you take time in a response, like, are those things that you just pick up over time, or is it something you can kind of, is that a learned behavior that you can kind of teach yourself? Like, walk me through that process, and I'm sure as a coach it's something that you help with your clients on. So what are some things that people can do?
Well, for me, I always like to take a high level perspective. I always like to say, okay, let me look at this situation and figure out the best way to try to navigate it or do better. And the anger was something I'd been wrestling with for a long time, since my marriage,
Hmm.
and that was something that was held against me a lot. I'd get angry, I'd explode, and then it's always a character assassination. It's never about why you exploded or why you reacted the way you did. It's always your reaction. And I had been carrying that for a while, and I said, how do I stop doing this?
Hmm.
What do I do? Okay, well, I take a step back. I say, okay, right now, and I can still feel in my body when I start getting reactive. And that's not something that I ever felt before the abuse. I never felt that coming on, and now I feel it. My heart starts to pound. Um, my hands start to shake, and I realize, okay, I'm having complex PTSD. This is my body reacting. So when my body starts to react like that, I know I have to go away from the situation. Do nothing. Don't respond. Don't engage. Leave the situation. Calm your nervous system down, and then come back to it. And then when you do come back, don't come back until you're in a place where you are calm enough to be able to think through your words and think about really what you want to say. Because there's something else that I learned, and I did not learn this on my own. This was something that I was taught. And I think this is so wise. We have control over what we say, but we don't have control over once it leaves our mouth.
Mm.
How it lands and how that person takes it. Once it leaves our mouth, it's gone. So we better be very careful about how we speak and what we say, and try to think about how is this going to land on this person? Or worse, if you're dealing with a manipulative personality, how is this person going to take it and manipulate it? And so that has really taught me, watch my words,
Hmm.
be sure about what I want to say, and sometimes it's best to say nothing at all.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's powerful because I know I know I've responded in ways, whether it's family issues or work life, to where you respond immediately, and then you hit that send button, or you say that, and you say to yourself, that was a response out of emotion, and you weren't thinking logically at the time, or and then but it's something that I give credit to my wife. I'm remarried, who has done a remarkable job of helping me say, hey, just take a step back, relax before you respond to something. And that's been great for me, and it gets my message, like you said, I'm able to get my message across to somebody because I'm responding in a way that is, take the emotion out, and we do it with logical thinking, and we don't do it off emotion. We do it off facts. We do it off, the information that is going to, not only I can portray the information the best way, but I also want it to be received the right way. So that's great advice. And again, I'm sure it's just something that most people probably just hopefully pick up over time. It's something that's very difficult to kind of learn or even be self-taught. Um,
Well,
you
first of
know,
all, kudos to your wife for that. That's wonderful. That's what being married is all about, is helping us to be better people. Um, yeah, I talk a lot about emotional maturity, and that is one of those things that you hope that you learn as you go through life. But I have found that you either have an innate ability and want and
Mm-hmm.
desire, which I believe comes from God, it's our
Mm-hmm.
conscience,
Correct.
to want to better yourself and to learn and to grow and to control your emotions. That's one of the biggest things the Bible talks about, is controlling your emotions, not letting
Mm-hmm.
your anger get the best of you. And that's a
100%.
hard one for a lot of us. Um, but again, I think it goes back to the desire to want to do that. And life beats us all up, and we all have regrets,
Mm-hmm.
except for those people who say, I don't have any regrets. Well, you should,
Mm-hmm.
because nobody does anything perfectly. And how we learn is we regret what we did, we look at it, we analyze it, we pick it apart. It beats us up enough that we go, I don't want to do that again.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't do that, then you never learn. And so that's why you still see people well into their middle age, flying off the cuff and saying horrific things and not controlling their emotions. And then they walk away and they never apologize. They don't analyze what they did. They have an excuse as to why they did it. It's your fault. Well, I wouldn't have done it if you hadn't said X, Y, and Z, taking no responsibility at all. And those people, whether it's a lack of emotional maturity or it's just that they absolutely do not want to self-reflect, they think it's weakness. I don't know. I think it's much more strength saying, I was wrong and I'm going to do better. That takes strength.
You were sitting there talking about that, about regret. That is something that it kind of, you just literally changed my perception of that, because I would say to myself, well, no, I have no regret, because I wouldn't be where I'm at today if I didn't make that decision. And so I should have no regret. But the way you just position that is saying, yeah, I should have regret, because, if you were to ask me, would you do something differently? Yeah, I probably would. And that to me says that I do have some regret, because I would do that thing differently, and I reacted out of emotion, and not with a clear head or a clear conscience or a clear mind. So that's interesting you mentioned that, because that kind of literally just changed my entire mind frame of how I thought about that. So
I'm glad it did.
thank you
Because
for that.
we always want to get to this, we always want to get to a better place. Analyzing our past and saying I have a regret helps us get there. I understand, I have no regrets because I wouldn't be where I am today. But if you're saying that in the context of I learned my life lessons and I had regrets along the way, okay. But if you're doing that, I'll share something that my ex said to me. Truly, he said this to me. He said, I never look in the rearview mirror, ever. I never look back. I only look forward. And I thought, that means you don't ever go back. And he doesn't analyze the past, have regrets, own up to your mistakes. He
Hmm.
doesn't. We
Wow.
have to do those things.
Right.
We have to.
Yeah. Well said. So, what does unshakable mean to you then? I know it's a term that you seem to use, correct? Unshakable. What does that mean to you currently where you're at right now?
Okay. Does that mean that I don't fall down? No. Does it mean that I don't hurt sometimes? No. Does it mean that I don't regret or cry? No. But it means that I know no matter what comes at me, I can take care of it. God's going to be with me and I can handle it. Because there was a time that I didn't think that I could. When I came out of my marriage, I literally could do nothing for myself. He had controlled every aspect of my life. And before meeting him, I had gotten an MBA. I was a consultant. I traveled. This was before the iPhone. So you actually had to get a map, and you had to figure things out yourself.
Or print them out on the computer and look at them.
Right? You'd land down in the airport and go to get your rent a car, and they'd draw you a map to get to the hotel. And the next morning I would get up and go drive to customer site. And I had turned into a person that literally was so broken
Hmm.
that I couldn't function. Um, and now I know that no matter what comes at me, I can handle it. I can do it. I'm not unshakable in the sense that I don't feel things or that um, I'm not able to be hurt, but I'm unshakable in my steadfastness in knowing that in my own mind, I can handle whatever comes at me.
So take us back a bit then. I want to learn a little bit more about family life, maybe some of the early adulthood before kind of everything changed. So maybe touch on that a little bit to give us a bit more background about you growing up, what your family life was like before, we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of a lot of things.
Well, I think that when when we're young, especially if we grow up in a household that is a broken family, and we have parents that are dealing with their own trauma, we we have choices to make. We can choose to be better or make a better difference in people's lives, be a better person, try to, I don't want to say not be my parents because they did have good qualities about them, but there were things about them, as everybody feels, that I did not want to become or be like.
Hmm.
And my childhood was very difficult. My mom was born in Lebanon. She moved to Colombia, South America when she was 3 years old. She was a Christian, so there was a lot of fighting going on there in the Middle East and still is. She came to the United States when she was 15. She was the oldest of five. She lost her mom when she was 15. Her father was very abusive. It's okay to hit women. It's okay to beat them. He beat my grandmother to the point where he basically killed her. My mom met my father when she was 19. My dad was one of four. He was the youngest. He grew up in poverty. He joined the army at 17. His father allowed him to do that, signed off on him to do that. You have to be 18 to join, but he was 17 because he wanted to get out of his small town.
Hmm.
He was 4 years older than my mother. She was 19 when they married, and they'd known each other 2 weeks before it was a blind date. And apparently, this was a thing back then. They didn't know if they were going to come back, so they would rush off and get married.
Right.
And my dad was in Vietnam, and they used to drop crate loads, a lot of people don't know this, of marijuana and beer on our guys to keep them, they thought they were doing them a favor,
Hmm.
keeping them sedated because of all the hell that they were witnessing and having to deal with. And my dad came back, just a broken man,
Hmm.
good guy,
Hmm.
funny, smart, handsome, but broken.
Hmm.
Uh, and my mom being broken from her childhood, she was explosive, a lot of anger. I was always really calm. That was one of the things that I think upsets me the most about the trauma that I went through in my divorce was that uh, I was always a very calm person, and now I'm trying to get that back. Uh, Trauma changes you, like
Hmm.
they did my parents, and I always I had never wanted to be like that. I wanted desperately to have a family. Um, I wanted to be an incredible mother and wife.
Hmm.
Both of my parents left high school when they were juniors in high school. My dad got his GED in the Army. I was one of the first on my dad's side of the family to graduate high school, much less go to college and get an MBA.
Hmm.
Um, I really I wanted to do things so differently. But like trauma has a way of repeating itself, I ended up marrying someone who was extremely controlling. My
Hmm.
mom was quite controlling because her father was, and that was the culture she was raised in. I think we tend to overlook the red flags in people because we've seen them before and we justify them or they're familiar to us. And so we don't recognize them.
Hmm.
Um, and although I wish I had done so many things differently, it wasn't for a lack of trying. I can tell you
Hmm.
that.
Yeah. When did you realize that you were dealing with a high conflict dynamic? What did that look like, or what was that awakening like for you?
This was before we knew really about, you know, very many personality disorders or control dynamics or, narcissism. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying my ex-husband definitively is a narcissist, but he sure ticks really high on the narcissism scale. He lacks empathy. He's very controlling. He lied. He cheated. I mean, it checks every box. But I knew on my honeymoon something was wrong. I knew something was wrong, but his parents were still married. Uh, and so I thought, okay, check that box. He doesn't come from a divorced family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he was also getting an MBA. We met at work, and we were both, the thriving couple, and he wanted a family, and he said he was a Christian, and we would go to church together, and but but something was off, and I didn't know what.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the first year or two of marriage, he just was not comforting or empathetic, or there was no connection, and I didn't understand why.
Mm-hmm.
But having come from a broken family, I wasn't really connected to my mom. I
Mm.
loved her terribly, but we didn't have deep conversations, and we weren't really connected, and my dad was not very present because he was dealing with his own, issues. So I thought, well, maybe this is how people are,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I'm expecting too much. Of course, I thought it was me.
Right.
Um, And then my father died suddenly. He had a massive heart attack, and our daughter was diagnosed with leukemia. She was 3. And I I needed him.
Mm-hmm.
I needed a partner. I needed my friend. I needed someone to lean on and to cry with and to pray with, and he was nowhere to be found. He was very stoic. I had really only seen him in the entire marriage. I'd only seen him cry a couple of times. He didn't shed a tear over our daughter, not one tear. It was like I can't explain it. Now I understand that there's just no empathy there. The empathy chip is not there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it it devastated me. I,
Mm-hmm.
I I didn't understand why he was like that. I would see other husbands and wives in the hospital together. I was always me going to the hospital. Now, I know we had other children at home, so he was at home with the other children,
Mm-hmm.
but we were never a team.
Mm-hmm.
It was never us against the world. It always felt like there was this barrier between him and I, and no matter how hard I tried to move past that barrier, I just couldn't.
Wow. How long did that um, kind of go on for? I mean, at what point? How long were you guys married for? And then when did you kind of say that enough is enough with this?
Well, it's interesting because we were married all in all 23 years and together 25 years. And I had just, I said, you know what? I can look at my blessings or I can look at what I don't have. And my ex husband, he did a lot of good things. He was very handy around the house. If I asked him to do anything, he would do it. Um, he, I thought, was a good father. We would double team on the weekends. I have 2 sets of boy-girl twins. They're 2 years apart, and he'd take the boys to the ball games, and I'd take the girls, and then, we would switch off, and I thought, well, emotionally he's not there, but maybe that's just how he's wired. And he would tell me, I'm not wired like that, but I show my love by doing things for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, we were building a life together. Uh, we had beautiful children. She'd come through her cancer.
Mm-hmm.
That was 2.5 years of chemo. That was tough. And I thought, okay, I described my marriage as a three-legged stool. I thought, you know, he's a good father, he loves his children, and he loves me. And that's enough. That's a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in 2018, he'd been traveling a lot, and I noticed our kids had started driving. So we had a Life 360 so we could make sure that the kids were
Monitor and
okay and
track.
know where they
Yeah.
were and how fast they were going.
Right.
And I noticed when he traveled, he was going out every night, and it was from bar to bar to bar to bar. And things had been changing between us intimately.
Mm-hmm.
And a woman just knows. I knew. I knew something was going on. And he wasn't treating me like he used to. I just knew something was up. And for me, because I knew that I wasn't being fulfilled emotionally, but for women, we can say, you know what, I I have my children, I have my home, he'll never cheat on me. That was one of my big things. Don't ever cheat on me. And when I found out he was cheating on me, I the third leg of the stool broke and it fell over. I mean, there was just no keeping it together anymore. And at that point, honestly, there had been so many years of control. My ex-husband never had my back. Um, and when the kids became teenagers, it was, he was always traveling. So it was me doing the disciplining.
Mm-hmm.
And I would ground them for something that they had done, and he would unground them. My oldest son, every night, I would cook dinner and do the dishes, and then I would go fold all the laundry, and I would put them all in a stack, and I would have the kids go into the bedroom and get their stacks of laundry and take them upstairs. So, and at that point, they were responsible for taking care of their own rooms and keeping them clean. I was doing enough. They were old enough to be able to clean their rooms. And one night I went upstairs to talk to my son, and I opened the door, and there were stacks and stacks and stacks of laundry all over the room. And the room was a disaster. And I said, and my son had been being quite disrespectful to me. And I found out later why. Um, that was the parental alienation already going on that I had no idea about. Um, and I said to him, I said, you're going to start doing your own laundry. This is just so disrespectful. And I was done with the disrespect. And I think at this point he was like 16 or 17. Um, my ex-husband went upstairs, got the laundry, brought it downstairs, and in front of my children said, you will wash the laundry, and took it into the laundry room.
Whoa.
That was the kind of undermining. If I grounded the children, he would unground them. If I said, you're going to go clean your rooms, he would go upstairs and clean them just to undermine me. When he wasn't traveling, we had a rule, kids go in after dinner and get the laundry off the bed. I'd already washed it. They were responsible for bringing the laundry downstairs, and then I would wash it and fold it. Sometimes I'd have to go upstairs and get it, but most of the time they'd bring it down, and I would wash it and dry it and fold it. And there was laundry every day. There were 6 of us. Okay. And so that was the rule. When things really started changing, he was undercutting me all the time. So one night I had said, and this happened often, go get the laundry off the bed, kids, before you go back upstairs or whatever. They didn't even pick their plates up to take them to, I did everything. I was the housemaid at this point, and I was treated like it.
Right.
And he says, no. You guys go on upstairs. You've got a lot of studying to do. I'll take your laundry upstairs. I mean, he undercut me every chance he got. And it just became worse and worse and worse. And it was to the point where I couldn't even open my mouth in my own home.
I got so many questions with that. I guess I just try to understand, like, why do you think that was happening? Like, what would trigger somebody to kind of undermine their spouse in that relationship? What do you think the end purpose, the end goal for him was to do that? Or maybe it's a question nobody can answer.
Yeah, it is. It is a hard one to answer. I think once he checked out of the marriage, my oldest son told me he said, Mom, Dad's been building a case against you for a long time. And I think that with that personality type, it gives them some sort of power to control you, undermine you, break you. There's some kind of sick power there dynamic. And I think he had already decided at some point he was going to leave the marriage. He was on several dating apps. He had already reached out to an executive dating service on LinkedIn. Like I said, he was going to bar to bar to bar. I think it was just a matter of time. He told my oldest daughter he was going to divorce me when the youngest children graduated high school. I think at that point he had already checked out, and he didn't respect me anymore. He just treated me he treated me horribly.
Yeah. So is that maybe I want to kind of transition? Like, do you think that's what the trauma that you were kind of going through, is that what day to day actually looks like for survivors in these situations? I know you're a survivor, but I mean, is that what basically most people are going through on a day to day basis like that, and just kind of go through that cycle every single day?
It's horrible. Yes. You're depressed and you don't know why and you feel like it's your fault because you're being told it's your fault. I was told you drove me to the dating apps. I was told, what a bad mother I was. I was told what a bad wife I was. And you're trying every day to be the good partner and to show up and to prove your worth um and you just keep getting knocked back down again and you eventually end up in such a depressed state that just getting out of the bed in the morning was really hard. Just getting through my day was incredibly difficult. Um it it's survival. It's like you're swimming through mud every single day.
Yeah. How do people like unknowingly stay trapped in these cycles though? Like, I'm sure and maybe, and I should have probably asked this earlier. You've been a life coach for how long? You been a life coach now for?
3 years.
3 years. Okay. And can I ask what you were doing before that?
Well, after my divorce, I went to law school.
Okay.
So I tried law school, and I had to face the very difficult reality that at 54 years old, it was going to be an uphill battle. I was looking around at all these 25 and 26 and 27-year-old minds, and they were brilliant. So it was going to be 2 more years of law school and then passing the bar. And I thought, do I really want to do this? And then I really got in touch with why I was doing it. It was to prove my self worth.
Hmm.
I could have
Well,
competed, maybe not as well, but I could have done it. But I realized I was trying to prove something to my children and to my ex-husband and to myself that I was worthy. Because my oldest son is graduating from medical school, my oldest daughter's graduating from law school, my youngest daughter's graduating from university this year, and my youngest son is applying to law school. My ex-husband is a vice president, and I'd been so treated like nothing more than a housemaid and I had no worth. And then I stopped and I thought, you know what, Shawn, why are you going to take on debt? Why are you going to put yourself through this to prove to people who aren't going to respect you and your worth anyway? Even if you accomplish this, if they didn't appreciate what you added to raising your children and being a faithful wife and a loving wife, then this isn't going to matter either. So stop. Stop trying to prove your worth. Find your worth within. And that's true. We have to find it within because we can accomplish a lot, but if we don't ever feel worthy, it doesn't really matter.
well, you mentioned, yeah, I know, I was going to circle back. You mentioned your age. By the way, you look great. I want to let you know that. As far as, I think I was going to ask the question is how do people unknowingly like stay trapped in these cycles? And I'm sure you know as a life coach, you hear these stories all the time. Uh, I, I'm just making an assumption, so correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure you're dealing with people that are actually still living in the situation and dealing with people that have left the situation. So those that are living in it, how do they stay trapped in these cycles constantly?
Well, usually it starts with self-worth. You think that you're the problem. You've been told you're the problem. I thought I'm too hard on the kids. Maybe I shouldn't expect them to get their laundry off my bed.
Hmm.
Maybe I shouldn't expect them to keep their rooms clean. Maybe I shouldn't have grounded them for saying they're going to spend the night at a friend's house and I find them on Life 360 at 3 in the morning driving around. I mean, you are told that you're wrong, wrong, wrong. And so you end up in a cycle where you're trying to prove yourself. And you've got all this time invested, 20 years and 4 children and homes and assets and there's a lot that goes into it and you're feeling like you're the problem so you're stuck in a cycle of trying to prove and you're better and that's one. And then as a woman, your worth when you've raised your children and you've been a wife for decades, you base your worth on that.
Hmm.
And to let that go is painful. It's just so painful. A man typically, and some women too, if they have a career outside the home, have another identity somewhere. But when your entire identity is your home and your family, you hold on to that, with both hands, and you don't want to let it go. And then, there were always promises. I'm going to do better. I'm so sorry. I regret it. There was no regret. You got caught. You got caught red-handed. And so, he fooled everybody. The therapists, he seemed so sincere. Now I know that was a narcissistic collapse when it happened. And then they flip the power dynamic back, and then they tell you it's all your fault. If you'd been a better wife, if you treated me differently, you know, that wouldn't have happened. And
Hmm.
so you being a self-reflecting person, you stop and you go, well, what if I didn't? What if I wasn't? I could be better. You don't want to lose your family.
Hmm.
So I think people get stuck in that cycle of the hamster wheel of always trying to perform, 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 and so it's really hard to break that mindset. It's very difficult.
What are some early signs that maybe somebody is kind of in that trauma bond, to where they say to themselves, like you just said, if I do this, or I'm doing just fine, they check all these boxes. Like, what are those early signs that somebody can look and potentially self-reflect that I'm stuck in a trauma bond here?
Well, if you're with a partner and your partner is not taking accountability, and I don't mean just saying it, I mean actually taking action and sticking with it. Not saying I'm going to do X, Y, and Z and do it for 2 weeks and then suddenly you're supposed to forgive and forget, but truly making a concerted effort and has true remorse and is working on changing the relationship.
Hmm.
Also, I think you have to look at the control dynamic. If I do believe in equality, but also a man is a man. And so he's going to have more typically control in the household. He just is. He's stronger, he's bigger, he probably makes more money, whatever the case might be. But if he doesn't try to elevate his wife, if he's putting you down in front of the kids, if he's making you feel like you don't, and vice versa, women do it to men too. Uh, if your partner is not lifting you up, and I don't mean glorifying you, putting you on a pedestal so they can knock you off whenever they decide. I mean, valuing you. If you're
Right.
always trying to prove your value and they're always undercutting you, and that's a trauma bond. The reason you're still in it is because you've been you've been told certain things, but the actions aren't showing it, and that's causing cognitive dissonance. And it's really hard when the person sits in front of you and says, I love you and I'm sorry, but then they go right back to the same behavior again, and then they come back and say, I'm sorry, and then they go right back, and then they come back and say, well, it's your fault. And then you think it's your fault. It's a cycle that it's abusive. It's not hard to I admire people who escape from it. I didn't escape.
Hmm.
Um, I was discarded brutally.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that that's what happens to most people. It's the only way you actually get out of that cycle. It's a brutal way to have to you're ripped apart from the inside out and everything you love is taken from you. But I know that God did that because I was going to die in that environment. It was just a matter of time.
Yeah, it probably put a ton of stress on you on a day-to-day basis. So for people that are listening, and people that you talk to that are dealing with these situations, whether they're currently in a divorce, they're potentially, like you said, if they're escaping it, they're likely going through a family court matter, whether they have kids or not. Specifically, if they have kids, more than likely they could be dealing with some alienation. How does that kind of stress level shape or reshape how they think and respond and even parent during that kind of high conflict?
Well, there is not enough information out there on emotional abuse. We know a lot about physical abuse.
Hmm.
I had a therapist tell me I would have rather him beat you than emotionally abuse you. When you are emotionally abused like that, you can't think clearly. So here you are trying to navigate a divorce and the family court system and finances, and oftentimes, you know, just the day to day life. Where am I going to live? How am I going to function? So your ability to be able to even function is completely lost. You can't. You just can't. You're walking around with the world on your shoulders, and you can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't think clearly. So you're here in this high turmoil situation trying to make these kinds of decisions, and they're not affected like that. They don't have that going on. So they're thinking clearly, and they're thinking to win. And so the dynamic is, again, the power struggle is so uh, uneven and disproportionate. It I call it a living hell,
Hmm.
honestly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can relate.
I know.
I've lived it. I'm currently living it, and I'm sure. I mean, I think you spoke on this. You start dealing with false narratives when you start going through this. So why are these false narratives of what's being told about you or shared about you, specifically in family court? Why do you think they're so hard to undo in that system? I know you mentioned that there's not much about emotional abuse that's really out there. I think it has a lot to do with it, but you start getting into this family court dynamic, and one of the things that I've learned is that you already said it is that these so-called experts, there's no one really out there trained to find or uncover or provide solutions to false narratives, to allegations, to all these things, and then really the emotional abuse side of things. I mean, maybe I already kind of answered the question, but why do you think that these things are so hard to undo or even try to prove that it's happening within the family court?
I think because these people are really good at what they do. They're usually they talk with authority, they speak, they believe their own lies. and and so to try to see through it is very, very difficult. And they're trying to do their jobs by protecting the children. And so they don't know who to believe. So they would rather err on the side of what they consider caution, which is believing the narrative instead of not believing it, because what happens if it is true? So that's why they do what they do. But little do they know that they're actually handing over their children to the parent who's going to do the most damage. It's not easy to recognize it, and I think unless you've been through it, I know I would be able to pick up on it like that. I guarantee you, I'd be able to pick up on it like that. But I've been through hell and back, so I know most people, thank goodness, haven't. And I always say it's kind of like a history professor. He may know history inside and out, but were you on the beaches at Normandy? Who would you rather talk to? Would you rather talk to the soldier that was on the beaches in Normandy, or would you rather talk to the professor that has read about it and studied it in a book?
100%. Nope. I want to hear from the person that was actually there.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep. So, what do you think people misunderstand most, since we're kind of on the topic of parental alienation a little bit? Uh, what do people misunderstand most about that?
They think that the parent must have done something wrong. I get a lot of comments like that that say, well, in order for a child to have alienated you, and that's estrangement, not alienation, and we can get into that, but those are two totally different animals. So I think people confuse them. But nonetheless, well, you must have done something. It has to be your fault. No child doesn't want to be connected to their parent. So it has to be you. And that couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because no child just wakes up one day and just says, I don't want to have a relationship with this parent. It just doesn't happen. I could sit here and tell you, some really sad, well, really ugly memories, share some very ugly memories about, some things that happened to me as a child with my own father. Um, i- to where, a lot of physical abuse, witness a lot of physical abuse. I mean, to the point I remember one time I used to watch my father, literally, you know, beat my mother almost senseless, and he did it to me. And I mean, to the point where I'm holding my mom's head at one point, bleeding. So like I saw some pretty ugly things and nasty things, but I still like didn't want to not have a relationship with the guy. Um, because it's my father. I didn't choose my parents; they chose each other. But I just didn't wake up one day and would not want to have a relationship with them. And I think that's a hard thing that people try to understand, that can't seem to comprehend, is that kids just don't wake up one day and just say, "Yep, I'm done," unless there's somebody on the other side that is feeding the narrative, feeding the story, and and I can understand the person that is shaping that story of why they want to do it that way. I guess maybe I have a little bit of empathy towards them because of that and what they're trying to do. But at the same time, I don't agree with it. I don't think it's right, because you're not just hurting, you think you're hurting one person, but in all reality, you're hurting multiple people. Not only are you hurting the other person, which is the potential, whether it's the mother or the father, you're hurting the child or children, you're hurting other grandparents potentially, and then you're also hurting yourself, because at the end of the day, things generally do come full circle sometimes, not all the time. At the end of the day, that's going to come full circle back around. That's going to negatively impact you one day. So, I mean, maybe I'm giving some advice there as far as what to anticipate or what to expect, but that is something that I've witnessed firsthand, and I've seen that you're not just hurting one person. There's a lot of people involved in that.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I mean, it has a filter down effect. And there's so many grandparents out there suffering by not seeing their grandchildren, and it's heartbreaking. But I want to add something. It's not so when this first started happening, I thought, there are drug addicted parents that their children still want to have things to do with them, and parents who did abuse their children, and the children still, because it's natural to want to connect. That's why you have children who were adopted try to find their parents when they grow up, even if they grow up in a wonderful family. There's something biological about wanting to be connected to the person that you belong to biologically. I mean, that's just a natural instinct. And but there's so much more to it than just them believing you're a bad parent. They are showing allegiance to the alienating parent. They are expected to show allegiance, and they are either actually told, but certainly it is implied, that you are not to have a relationship with the other parent. If you do, then you're rejecting me.
mhm.
It's a very unhealthy dynamic, and it's child abuse is what it is. It You would never not want your child to have in a relationship with the other parent unless the other parent truly was abusive. And when I say abusive, and it's sad that I have to define this, but I have to define this because there's a lot of estranged kids that are estranged for ridiculous reasons. Mom and dad didn't give me enough money. They didn't buy me my car that I wanted when I was 16. That's a whole generational problem.
Yeah.
But when I say there should be a reason why you disconnect, because that connection is important. And if your parent beat you, sexually abused you, verbally annihilated you, of course you're protecting yourself. But if you have a parent that made mistakes and is not perfect, you still benefit more by having the relationship with that parent if they are somewhat reasonable and healthy. And so our children are not only lied to, but they are told not to have a relationship with the other parent. They are bribed a lot of times. I see that happen a lot too. If one of the parents has a lot of money, they know that that faucet's going to turn off if they decide to go have a relationship. And then a lot of times they've got siblings. So if they decide that they want to have a relationship, it's a cult. So they step out of line, and then the siblings make fun of them and say, "What are you doing over there?" And I can't believe you're doing it. It takes a lot of character for someone to say, "I'm going to buck the system and I'm going to go have a relationship because that's the right thing to do and that's what I want to do." And that certainly doesn't happen typically in young adults, much less adults in their 20s. And we also know that minds don't stop forming until they're about 25 years old. And so it takes a big person to do that. And
Mhm.
what has to happen is the pain of not being with the parent has to become greater than the pain that they know is going to be inflicted upon them by the alienating parent and possibly grandparents and siblings. That takes time. And not everybody gets there. For some people, it's just not worth the fight. They're not going to do it. They're going to stay comfortable where they are. And that's that.
Yeah. So flipping to, because we've obviously talked about a child who has been alienated, and you go and seek somebody, and it takes a lot for somebody to go find that other parent, and that you're going to be blackballed, or you're going to be the black sheep of the family, and people are going to turn against you. But on the other end of it, as the alienated parent, the alienated parent, I've witnessed it, I've seen it. You've lived it. You deal with a lot of people that are probably going through this. At what point does fighting back actually cause more harm than healing? At what point do you just kind of have to take a step back and say, you know what? This isn't getting any better, no matter how hard or how much I say I love you, no matter how often I'm present, no matter how much I show up, nothing is getting accomplished. What point do you actually say to yourself, and how do you determine enough is enough, and I'm causing more harm unintentionally than I am actually healing in this process, and healing not only for myself, healing for them and everyone else involved? What point do you actually say enough is enough, and I'm causing more harm than health?
Right. Well, I want to go back to something real quick. Remember when we talked about being in the hamster wheel and the trauma bond? Okay. It's the same thing when a parent keeps trying to prove, but I'm a good parent and I love you and I keep reaching out and see me and hear me. It's the same thing. And I get a lot of comments that say, and this is really more about them. Well, I still reach out to my child every Merry Christmas, and I do it on Easter, and I send the birthday because I'm going to be the bigger person. Well, that comment's all about you. It's not, if that's really how you feel, then you don't need to shame other parents or, take the high road. So I delete those comments because I don't want other parents feeling bad or second guessing. But you're on that hamster wheel. Okay. Now I'm talking about children that are at least teenagers and on. I'm not talking about little kids where you're still fighting over custody and that kind of thing. Although I do understand dropping the ball there too. It can become a bad power dynamic. So we can talk about that too. But right now I wanted to focus more on kids that are teenagers and older. So your child or children has learned that power dynamic. They watched you and your ex-spouse, you, specifically me, I would follow my husband from room to room to room to room like a nut, trying to resolve, and he would love it. And I would go talk to, trying to have a conversation, right?
Yep, yep, yep.
And I'm sure anybody watching would be like, what in the world is this woman doing? But I was hurting so much and I wanted the connection and I wanted to resolve, because that's what healthy people do. We come together, we communicate, we talk it out, we come to a resolution. That's not how this dynamic works. It's always you chasing and you trying and them getting a control high off of, here she comes again. Look, she's
Yep.
crying again. Look at the effect I have on her. So the kids learn this. So when you and this type of dynamic keep reaching out and reaching out, you're on the hamster wheel, just like a trauma bond. And they get power every time. Oh, here goes dad again. And they feel that power by ignoring you because that's what they learned. They think that gives them strength. And it's sad because the one extending the olive branch is the one who is the healthier one and can say, I'm going to not think about my ego in this moment because I love you and I want to connect with you. And high conflict personalities and narcissism is all about ego and power and control. And the kids learn this. So when do you step back? You step back when you when you step back when your texts aren't being answered and you're being ignored. Excuse me. And you do what I call leave the ball in their court or let go of the rope. And you send one final text, or maybe you don't text at all, depending on the dynamic and what's going on. But you say something like, I love you. I love you a lot. And I want a really healthy relationship with you. And I'm going to leave the ball in your court. And if or when you're ever ready for that, I'll be here. And that's it. You say nothing else and you let it go and you pray. You pray that life circumstances will bring them around to a different perspective, and that one day they'll reach out. And maybe in 5 years you send another one. I don't know. I'm just saying. I don't know. But it would still be the same thing. I'm still here. I want you to know I love you. That's it. You don't chase, because it just goes back into that power time. You might as well just go after your ex again and say, oh, please come back to me. Please abuse me some more. Please treat me terribly. Please cheat on me. Please, you think they're going to change? I'm not. Your kids have learned that dynamic, and only they can decide what kind of person they want to be. Look, they got two parents. Some will become their dad or their mom that is the alienating parent. They will, if not all. I don't know. We don't know the outcome of that. And hopefully some will say, I don't want to be that. I want to be better. And I want a relationship more with my alienated parent than I want to align with something that I know is bad. Again, that's the discomfort. That discomfort and the conscience has to be louder than this pull over here of the alienating parent and whatever that family dynamic is. And until or if that happens, they're not going to make a move.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was actually starting to tear up a little bit there because I just kind of started thinking about my situation and kind of the last couple words that my father ever said to me, that I had to live with for, well, when I was 13. I remember standing outside of the courthouse and we had just gone to court. And when I say we, I said my mom and my father. They're already divorced, and I don't necessarily recall what the hearing was about. I assume child support, something along those lines. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. And I remember getting done in this courtroom, and I believe I just had gotten done potentially testifying or asked a few questions. And anyways, long story short, I remember seeing my father go out in the parking lot, and I'm standing kind of in this court open area, and I could see out the window, and he was getting in his truck. And again, I still wanted to have a relationship with this guy, even though, I could say a lot of things that I didn't appreciate about him necessarily, or even as a young child and a teenager. But I remember seeing him in that parking lot, and I just kind of ran out there, and he was getting ready to pull out of the parking lot. He gets out of his truck and just stands there and looks at me. And we didn't say a word, but it felt like we were kind of standing there for hours. And I remember my mom still being inside. I'm sitting there just kind of watching him drive off, and he gets out of his truck, stands there and looks at me, and he just says to me, "One day you'll know the truth." And it broke my heart.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes me tear up too.
And I
Yeah.
remember about 3 or 4 years later, he was still, what about 4 years? And I say 17 years, not really having a relationship, 16, 17 years, I having a relationship with him. I did see him two more times. I saw him when I believe I was 16, showed up in an area that he had been living in. I was playing in a basketball game. He showed up, um, unexpectedly. And unfortunately, there was a dispute, between my parents. And I remember changing in the locker room, being told, "Hey, your dad's here." And there's basically a people surrounding these my parents, and a big argument broke out outside the gymnasium. And I remember standing there and basically asked my father to leave. At that moment, he looked me in the eye and says, "If I leave here, you'll never see me again." And he's like, "Is that sure? Are you sure that's what you want me to do?" And I said, "Yeah." And he was right. I think that was his breaking point for him to say, "You know what? Now I can't. I'm not going to sit here and defend anyone. Did he really try? I don't know to see me. What was his? Was he really truly fighting in the court system? Was he? I don't know. And you know what? I'm not here to pick sides necessarily of who's right and who's wrong, but I can tell you this much: probably at that time in his life, hearing his 16-year-old son tell him, "Yeah, I don't want you here," was probably his breaking point, and that was his time to walk away. And then, you know, for me, when I held my first child, I kind of took a step back in my life and said, I just find it hard to believe that somebody would just randomly get up and walk away. And, I wanted to seek him. And again, I don't know if I ever got the answers I was ever looking for 13 years later, 14 years later. But at least I had that peace and comfort knowing that I did find him. I was able to kind of spend a few years with him before he passed away a handful of years later. Um, and so, for those listening that are kind of going through that kind of trauma of alienation, um, I know sometimes it doesn't always end that way to where you get reconnected. But I can tell you that as somebody who's lived it as a child, who is personally going through some situations currently with some issues inside the family court system, that it is likely that they do think about you, that they will come around one day. And hopefully I can give people that gives people hope and encouragement, because those kind of things, um you know they sit with you for a long time. And especially if you sit and reflect and you start looking at yourself and your self-worth and your image, and you kind of grow up a little bit with your personal maturity. You start really asking yourself, was this all 100% truth? Was there, because somewhere in the middle was probably the truth. That's where it changed for me, was having my own family. And it opened my eyes to say, I've got to find my dad and at least, um, understand and hear his side of the story. And I never really wanted to pick a side. And I still to this day will sit here and firmly say I never picked a side. Unfortunately, um, I felt like I had to pick a side for the longest time. And that's kind of where my relationships deteriorated, was because I wasn't allowed to really have my opinion, even though they disagree with one another. That's not my problem. Allow me to have a relationship with both of you equally, because that's what I was looking for. But at the end of the day, I found my father. I established or reestablished a little bit of a relationship with him. And at least I can go to sleep at night knowing, and this is the one thing I don't regret, is knowing that I did seek him and find him, because if I would have done it before he passed away, I would have lived a long time with a lot of.
Yeah. I'm sorry that that happened to you, and thank you for sharing that story. I want to touch on a couple of things here for people listening. Your dad in that moment, he had, and you were 16. So this has, I'm not saying that's why I want, a lot of parents are angry. I was angry too.
Hmm.
Okay. And we think that our children are better able to handle situations than what they really are. And when I say children, I mean, you know, teenagers and young adults. Your dad in that moment had humbled himself to come and see you. Your mom was attacking him, and as a woman, who knows, I would imagine that the men there were saying, you need to leave, and your mom was pulling the victim card and whatever. And you being a 16-year-old boy, you were, I don't know what was going through your mind. I would imagine a little embarrassment, and your mom saying, so you ask your dad to leave. And in anger and humiliation, he said, "You know what? Okay, I I reached out. I took it upon myself to come here, and you asked him to leave. And he, at that point, threw his hands up and said, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where that was coming from. You talked about feeling like you could not go to your dad and how you never wanted to choose a side. Healthy parents, while I will say in a contested, heated divorce, most, not all, and I commend those that don't, say things we shouldn't say about the other parent in front of our kids. Or
Mm-hmm.
if they have really hurt us or harmed us, we may say things that we shouldn't have said. But at some point, most people, adults who have children, get to a reasonable place and realize it is not healthy for the children not to have a relationship with both parents. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, you didn't want to choose a side,
Yeah.
right? You shouldn't have been expected to choose a side, but that's not how it works. You were to align with your mother and hate your father.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really the only choice you had. You were under her roof. She was taking care of you. She was you were dependent on her. And that's where the children get tremendously hurt because it's not fair to the child.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely not fair. And it's wrong.
Yeah, it's not fair. And again, I'm 42. So, for somebody who's been kind of living with this for nearly 30 years and really longer, because I mean, again, you know, they didn't have a healthy marriage. And so, these are things that I've carried with me for a long time. And, I enjoy, I don't want to say I enjoy talking about it, but I enjoy potentially helping people that are going through something like this because it can have lasting impacts on you as you get older. Um, and it's something that I've had to carry with me and still continue to carry with me. And I'm not using it for a victim card because I'm not trying to be the victim here. I'm sharing a story that and hopes that it changes people's perspectives from high conflict or alienation issues or concerns within the family court system. Because as we alluded to earlier, the family court is not really set up for that kind of emotional trauma. And really at the end of the day, you're harming a child, whether you think you are or not, by doing those sort of things. And it's something they have to deal with. And it not just impacts the relationship with those two parents down the road, or even initially, at least with one of them, it impacts relationships for the rest of their lives, whether it's with spouses, whether it's with their own children, whether it's with surrounding family or friends. I mean, it has a massive, massive ripple effect on people.
Absolutely. That's where generational trauma comes from.
100%.
It's carried on from generation to generation to generation. And, another thing that I really want to touch on for your viewers because it affected me a lot is when we are in these unhealthy situations. I touched on a little bit about the anger and doing things we wish we hadn't done, but there's also any pain that you're in is used against you. Any trauma that you're going through is used against you. So if you are depressed or suicidal, or you turn to alcohol or to try to cope, or any of those mechanisms that people do in situations where they're trying to survive, the alienating parent takes that and runs with it. And that kind of thing is evil. It's like beating someone to a bloody pulp and then blaming them for bleeding. So emotional abuse causes people to do things that they obviously would not do if they had been in a healthy relationship. And the alienating parent uses those things against you to try to turn the children. And in those types of situations, I really feel bad because I've experienced it. The shame, the stigma that goes with it, and how it's twisted.
Mm-hmm.
And for those parents, I want to say, you focus on you.
Mm-hmm.
You do whatever it takes to get healthy again, have a healthy mindset again. And so that if, like Ryan said, there is a chance one day that you reconnect, your child will come back to a healthy parent.
Yeah, because they want to see you healthy. I mean, at the end of the day, they don't want to see you broken. They want to see you pick up the pieces and figure life out. So I know that we're coming up close here on time, and I've got a few more questions I want to kind of fire off here. But um, if someone is listening, or if for someone that's probably listening, could be in the darkest part of their life right now, what would you want them to hear to help them through that?
Well, the darkest part of my life was the suicides. And what I want to say to them, and I'm going to get choked up saying this. Ooh, hang on. Give it one more day. And then give it another day. And then give it another day. I know that right now, every second of every minute of every day feels like you're on fire and you cannot find relief. But I promise you, I promise you, I promise you, even though your brain is trying to help you, your brain's saying, you know what? It's looking everywhere and it says, there's no escape from this and this is never going to end. So I've got a solution. That's not the solution. You will come out of this. You will, you will, you will.
What kind of legacy are you hoping that your work leaves behind?
That's interesting because I've been praying a lot about that lately, about reaching people and helping people. There's so much pain in the world right now. Alienation has become a huge, big deal right now. And I don't know if we're just more aware of it. I know part of it is society and the cutoff culture. But if I could leave one thing behind, I hope that I have given some people some hope and some peace.
Well said. Well said. I think that that's kind of the, you know, because you can't, I mean, you could, when you think about leaving something behind, especially when you get into alienation and false narratives, I value my character more than I value money and material things. You can leave money behind, you can leave cars behind, you can leave houses behind. That stuff only lasts so long. That money will eventually run out, and you're blessed enough to kind of leave those kind of things. That's wonderful. But at the end of the day, like I'd much other people, stand over, my casket and say, man, he was just a good dude. Like literally, I want people to say he was a good dude. He cared about people and he would do anything for you. And hopefully, that those kind of stories get handed down because I want people to look back, and that's my legacy I want to leave behind is that I treated people with kindness and kind of exactly what you said is just you hope that you're helping people with your mission and your story. So
Yeah,
I
that's
resonate with
admirable.
that. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, because that's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. A couple rapid fire, maybe one word answers, but one word to describe healing.
Time.
One myth about narcissistic abuse.
That it's not real.
Hmm. One practice you should never skip.
Prayer.
One truth survivors need to stop ignoring.
That the reaction isn't the problem, the abuse is.
We've come to the end. Thank you so much. Now,
Thank
before we
you.
kind of get to the end here, people need to know how to find you. Floor is yours. Give us your handles. How do people get a hold of you? What social media outlets are you on?
I am on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Is that all of them? Yeah.
Think
Is that all
so?
of them?
I think so.
And my handle is the same across the board. Shawn, spelled SHAWNK, as in Kimberly Howerton, HOWERTON. Shawn K. Howerton.
And I will tell people that literally, if you just type in exactly her name, Shawn Howerton, you will find her.
Okay. There you
So
go.
I found her pretty easily when I was looking for her on social media. She came across my For You page. That's how I originally found her. So, it's pretty easy to find her. I will also put her information in the bio of the podcast as well. So people can find her as well. We'll definitely tag you in these posts. You can use these posts as you want to for your own stuff as well, Shawn. So,
Thank you.
um,
I
any
want to
final
say thank
words?
you, Ryan. I really do. And thank you for sharing your story. I know there's a reason we were brought together. My heart goes out to you. You've got a really special story. And, God's going to use that story. Not only did you experience it as a child, but you're experiencing as an adult. Um, and I think your work is amazing. So thank you for having me on today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Um, yeah, I did some rebranding, some things I wanted to do, and I transitioned a little bit from, um, I've had some great guests on, but this having you on hits back to the core of what I'm trying to accomplish, which is really what One Unsilenced Voice really stood for, is just to speak up and to share your truth, even if it means that you could, because not everyone's going to accept your message. Now, you could lose relationships because of it. And, it's about, for me, it's about helping people. It's about incorporating my faith into that. And then obviously, you know, helping people through a very traumatic time. So I appreciate your kind words. I'm still, um, growing my message, but you are doing some awesome things and really helping a lot of people out there. So thank you for coming on to this for sure.
Thank you,
So,
Rye.
as we wrap this up, just want to take another moment. For those that have been listening closely, you probably felt this. What Shawn shared with us today isn't just her insight. It's obviously lived experience, not only for her, but for me. It's a reminder that healing isn't about winning arguments, proving your innocence, or forcing people to see the truth. That sometimes healing looks like learning how to stay steady when the story being told about you isn't always fair, and choosing not to lose yourself in that process. So, again, Shawn, just hang on just for a second as we wrap this up. Again, thank you. Thank you to those listening. And this is One Unsilenced Voice.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One Unsilenced Voice podcast. Please be sure to like and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And remember, you are a voice that deserves to be heard.